5, 4. All across the country, we're seeing people out in the streets. The resistance is growing. And yes, the resistance is televised. At the end of the day, what it's going to take is it's going to take you, me, us, folded, demanding change, holding folks accountable. And one of those people doing that, a good friend of mine, Eric Robertson, he's the political director down in Atlanta, Georgia for Team.
Here, Rick.
So when you see this kind of really the taking to the streets and people joining organizations and coming together, what do you think?
I tell you, I was in a pretty deep funk, as I imagine a lot of other people were after the election, and so when I started seeing the pushback almost immediately in the streets of Atlanta, there were these spontaneous protests that would just pop up on Facebook event pages, where people that had really never done anything before were just putting together protests, and it was very informal, but hundreds and hundreds of people were showing up, sort of these spur of the moment protests, and then obviously I anticipated there being kind of a showdown on okay.
5, 4. All across the country, we're seeing people out in the streets. All across the country, people are engaged, activated, and demanding change, demanding their voice to be heard. That's why I think it's important that we talk to folks who are out in the streets. And one of those folks, my good friend Eric Robertson, he's the political director of Teamsters Local 728 down in Atlanta, Georgia. Eric, thanks for taking time for us.
Glad to be here, Rick. Greetings from behind enemy lines.
So when you see this, and look, I've seen reports in your neck of the woods of people out in the streets all across this country demanding their voice be heard and, well, holding our elected leaders accountable.
Yeah, it's been really amazing. I think me, along with a lot of other people after the election, were really, just quite depressed. It was just, you really knew kind of what was coming. And it was very frightening. I was thinking about all my friends. My children go to school, some immigrant families, and they were just deathly afraid. And it was just it was a terrifying moment for a lot of people. And it was a moment of for me, just sort of at first sort of shock and disbelief, and then you really saw these people starting to mobilize almost immediately, creating very spontaneously, lots of people who had never organized protests before, putting together Facebook group protests and just showing up at different parts of in Atlanta, different parts of Atlanta, taking spontaneous, unpermitted marches throughout the city, just shutting down traffic and those types of things. And that really was incredibly inspiring and really gave me some hope. But then when the inauguration happened and you really saw the breadth of the opposition that showed up on Inauguration Day, that was just an incredible boost. And then, of course, the very following day, you had the enormous protest in Washington, D.C., the Women's March.
Yep, enormous.
And in Atlanta, we had over 60,000 people show up. It was there's debate over whether it's the biggest in Atlanta's history, but it's certainly probably the biggest within the Atlanta city limits that's ever happened. And so it was just, and you really saw this cross section of the American population come out that had never showed up before, had never been to a protest before, had never mobilized like this again. And you could see that people were very serious about pushing back and protecting people that they saw as being under attack.
Right. Well, we're at a moment of crisis, and I think a lot of people get that. Never before, at least in my lifetime, have we had a moment like we're having right now.
Me either. Yeah, it's just it's really blown my hair back. And then these protests that happened after the Muslim ban were just incredible. We went to the Atlanta Metro Airport, Hartsfield International Airport, and they shut the entire airport down. It was like the entire area out in front of the airport was just occupied, and it was it's fantastic. It's great to see. And, I think if we keep mobilizing like that and we keep expanding the number of people who participate in that movement, and we draw in bigger and bigger forces, I think we stand a chance of really mitigating the damage that
some of
Donald
the
Trump
ugliness. Sure. Well, I mean, you're already seeing Republican congressmen coming out and saying that because of these protests, because people are coming to these town halls and jamming the town halls, that the Affordable Care Act might not get repealed because they got a bunch of Republicans on the run.
Well, yeah, and what it's also done is it's caused the more moderate Republicans to look at ways to sort of placate the fears of people by talking about not getting rid of the pre-existing condition ban and things like that. And so the mobilizations have created a split even among the Republican Party now, because you have the hard right, the Ted Cruz's and the Rand Pauls of the world, who are saying they won't support any replacement, basically, that is not 100% sort of libertarian-esque.
Yeah, pay or die.
And so basically we've jammed things up, and these mobilizations are the key to it all. I mean, because it certainly hasn't been the majority of the Democratic Party really pushing back as much as it's been the people, and through that giving our elected officials the courage to take those stands that they've taken.
Right, but at the end of this, as a labor organizer, as you've been for a number of years, it's this kind of enthusiasm that you want to see happening. You want people active and engaged and willing to organize, so that not just that we can make society better and fight for better policy, but also take it into the job place. Because I always bring everything back to economics. If you don't have the ability to afford to put a roof over your head and food on the table and the ability to take a day off, you're not going to have the ability to fight for a functional democracy.
Yeah, and so I don't know about you, but I was quite upset when I saw the building trades have the meeting with President Trump and come out of it talking about how they were looking forward to working with him. And meanwhile, at the same time they're having that conversation, there's a bill making its way through Congress that's going to eliminate the prevailing wage laws that help keep standards up for government projects and keep basically sweatshop low-rung employers from getting government contracts. And so they're, on the one hand, talking about this positive relationship and the possibility of getting more building trades jobs from, I don't know, building the wall, I suppose, or the pipelines. And then on the other hand, at the exact same moment, they're being, their knees are being cut out from under. And the labor movement, even the ones who are not trying to kiss up to the president, has been a bit disturbing.
Yeah.
And,
so they're dangling a mini carrot out and beating him with a big stick.
That's right. That's right. At the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the difference. They're not offering them a choice. They're saying, suck up to us, and then they suck up to them, and then they continue to push forward these policies. At that same get Andy Puzder through as the labor secretary, and want to look at the potential of really pushing back and stopping some of the worst aspects of this administration. You look at Andy Puzder, where we did mobilize and where we did push back with the help of our friends in these various progressive organizations like Move On and Our Revolution and organizations like that. Andy Puzder himself, basically complained that his nomination was torpedoed by the left.
And good. I mean, this shows that direct action. This shows that the resistance. This shows that people in the streets, that calling their congressman, calling their representative, shows it works.
That's right. That's right. So if we take that lesson and generalize it and apply it, I mean, we have a pretty good roadmap to really stopping the worst stuff in its tracks, and including keeping Gorsuch.
Fight, isn't it?
We have to die on. I don't see how, if we don't stop Gorsuch, I don't see how we don't stop a reacting going forward.
Right. And this is where, again, what you're talking about, people in the streets, that kind of active, engaged of people their phone lines.
If we don't, every way we possibly, this.
And that's really it. That's where we've got to take this, where where the politicians are afraid of we the people, do what we want, which is why I think it's so important that you and others in Atlanta and all across this country are out in the streets and fighting. Eric, I appreciate you taking time for us. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much, Rick.
Eric Robertson, Teamsters Local 728. Again, you come back to this. It's all about taking to the streets. As I've been saying, boots in the streets, arms folded. Quick break, right back. You're watching The Rick Smith Show.